The 701st edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
They're dancing in the arms. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for 2. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding? Into Dixon. Boozer switches onto him. Dixon the kick. Trimble! Got it! And Carolina wins it!
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you guys on a Friday afternoon as we've got some news regarding Carolina's search for a new basketball coach. And it's not the news that we were hoping or expecting or maybe even anticipating, as Arizona head coach Tommy Lloyd announced earlier this afternoon he is going to stay at Arizona and not leave for UNC like many of us thought he was going to do, regardless of what happened this weekend at the Final Four. So we have a lot to dive into and a lot to react to because pretty much fair to say it's chaotic on the Carolina message boards, on social media. A lot of people with a lot of different reactions to this news that Lloyd is not going to leave Tucson for Chapel Hill. Before we get into that, though, we have a pod thought of the day, and this is from Anson Dorrance, and I thought this was very apropos for what we're sitting here getting ready to talk about. That pod thought is, quote, "It is rare indeed when you are doing exactly what you want to do with exactly the people you want to do it with in exactly the place you want to be. In life, most people are happy when they get one right, and two is like heaven, and getting all three could only happen in Chapel Hill," end quote. And I think, when we thought that Tommy Lloyd was coming, I thought the back end of this, of that quote would really measure up to him, that he would be happy at a place that he would grow to love, with people that he would be able to achieve a lot of success with at the exact right place. Because it felt like on the surface, the right place for him was North Carolina. But after some last-minute strings, that right place for him and his heart and his mind was to stay exactly where he is, which is the head coach of the Arizona Wildcats. And so with that, let's just go ahead, Anthony, and get right into this thing. He signed a 5-year contract extension. He got a pretty significant raise, one that took him from making $4.85 million to north of $7 million. Even though he did take less to stay with Arizona, Carolina's contract offer was going to make him a top 2 paid coach in all of college basketball. He's now, I believe, the fourth highest paid coach in all of college basketball. Significant increases in pay for his staff, reconfirmed commitment in terms of NIL revenue sharing to ensure that Arizona basketball continues to compete at the level that it's competed at under him. Most importantly, and this had to be, I think, the deal changer and what swayed his decision. We talked so much about this when we recorded yesterday. The power struggle between him and his AD is no longer. He no longer has to report directly to his AD. The AD is not being fired, but now Tommy Lloyd, instead of having an answer to the AD, will answer to the president of Arizona. And I think we talked about this yesterday, and it felt like if that got resolved in any form or fashion, it felt like that would probably be the needle that swung for him to stay exactly where he's at. He got that. I think that was the biggest hurdle in this decision that he had to make. And I think to me, that's the biggest reason why he's not going to be the next head basketball coach at North Carolina. He's going to stay at a program that he's built and has on the verge of winning a national championship with. You're muted.
Yeah, I think that was one of the main things that we talked about. I think we looked at it and said that the situation really was the most important thing was he was going to have to be able to somehow have a connection that was different to the athletic department than reporting directly to the athletic director. There seemed to be some sort of fracture between the two sides. And so it seemed like that was ultimately something that wasn't going to be repairable. This is the way that you repair that is you say, hey, you don't have to report to me anymore. You have to report to someone different. There will be someone that will handle the basketball side of things and she will stay out of it. And so I think that was really the biggest thing. Not only did he get what he wanted in that respect, he ends up getting a pay bump as well, and he ends up getting money for his assistant. So he got everything that he wanted. Credit to Arizona. They went out and did exactly what they needed to do to be able to keep him. It's just for Carolina, it's got to be disheartening because you thought that this was your guy. From every indication that we got, Carolina was locked in and they thought that they had Tommy Lloyd in as their next head coach. I think the fact that there are some rumors that they called an emergency board meeting after Tommy Lloyd said what he said today prior to Arizona's practice at the Final Four, I think shows you that there was an expectation that he was going to take the job. So, this is certainly concerning if you're Carolina because you were looking for a certain caliber of coach. I don't know if you're going to necessarily get that caliber of coach now, but we're just going to have to wait and see whether or not Carolina can still get someone of significance or if this is a pattern that shows that the job, even though we still think it's the best in the sport, and I've said it on social media even after Tommy Lloyd ended up taking the job, Carolina is still a better job than Arizona is. And so I think that's still the case, but I think that ultimately what's going to tell us whether or not that's true is who Carolina ultimately lands as their head coach.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember this is the first real candidate that they've swung and that they've missed on. When you look at Brad Stevens, that was a pipe dream. There was a lot that was going to have to go right for that to even be under consideration. I think they had their eyes set on TJ Otzelberger. If it got down to him, but before Carolina even had to get to him, he took his name out of the running. I still think it's okay to be confident Carolina's going to get a really good, a really big time basketball coach. Just because you don't get Tommy Lloyd doesn't mean you're not going to get the type of guy that you want, the type of guy that you need, because this is still North Carolina. This name is still going to attract big time coaches. You didn't get your preferred candidate, and look, that sucks. That was the guy that you and I had both zeroed on. I was already having fantasies of what he would look like on the sideline. What the Carolina basketball program would look like, how that would operate. But That's just not the way that it was meant to be. But it doesn't mean that Carolina's going to have to resign to hiring some slappy. Like, I still think they're going to get a really good, a really quality basketball coach. You're just going to have to go through the next step in that process, and we'll talk about that just here a little bit later on in the show. Did want to bring you audio, though, from Tommy Lloyd's presser where he did announce that decision to stay. Two different quotes that I want to bring from you or bring to you guys. One for him announcing that he was staying, the other one where he addressed a major rumor about his interest in the sport. So let's go with the first one, the most important quote. Here's Tommy Lloyd at his presser today announcing he's staying at the University of Arizona and not leaving Tucson for Chapel Hill.
I'm happy to announce I'm staying at Arizona. We've been able to get some things done the past couple days. I really appreciate, President Garamella, John Arnold, and Desiree, for showing a real commitment to our program. And, Arizona basketball, you guys know what it means to me. And when I say it's a special place, that always comes from the bottom of my heart. I didn't want to make this entire Final Four about that because I'm just a small part of something much bigger. But on that same note, I'd also like to, let you know that North Carolina is an amazing place. I mean, it's a one of one, and it's an honor to even be, considered for that job. And the young kid, for me, the college basketball junkie, watching those games at home, never would have thought something like that could have happened to somebody like me.
All right, so there's Tommy Lloyd announcing that he was going to stay. And by his very first answer, or by the very first sentence, where they were able to get some things done to keep him in place, tells you that there was legitimate interest in the job, and that had they not come through within the last handful of hours, we don't know what the exact timeline is just yet, he was probably going to take the job, which means that Carolina made a really strong, competitive offer that had him interested and probably had him as much as 1 foot out the other or 1 foot out the door as a coach could be while getting his team prepared to play in the Final Four. You knew that Arizona was they were going to have to do something to counter, to find a way to get him to stay. And I don't think it's an accident that when he was going through the list of people that he thanked, who was the last person that he thanked? It was the AD that he thanked. That's the very last person, which I think is another sign, another indication of just how legitimate the reports about that fractured relationship are. Like, I don't think that was some fabricated lie to make people believe that he would leave for Carolina. I could be wrong, but, and look, sometimes you do the chancellor. There's not really a specific order that you do that when you're thanking these people when they give you a new contract. I thought it was very on point that he thanked the AD last. And the back end of that statement, all he did for 25, 30 seconds is praise this job. And talk about how special of a job this is. We can sit here and be upset that he's not going to be our next basketball coach. We can sit here and say that he used us and that we were just a leverage piece. I think Tommy Lloyd, with the circumstances that he was put in, considering that his team was still playing, I think he did this in as respectful of a way as possible, outside of outright denying interest publicly. But we knew all along he was interested. He was just giving his current employer a chance to give him a reason to stay. And ultimately, unfortunately, they were able to do enough that he wanted. And that's why he's not coming. He's not coming to Chapel Hill. But, for me, while I will not be rooting for him to win on Saturday night, it's not as personal, I think, as some people are taking this. Arizona's a really good job. It's a place where you can do the type of things that he's doing. And when you're given the kind of power that he's given, I could see why he's willing to stay on a West Coast where he's comfortable, as opposed to uprooting and moving to a place he's never lived before.
Yeah, I mean, it's a top 10 job. There's no doubt about that in college basketball. That was just, proven by the article that was released where they surveyed coaches and said, where do you rank these jobs? And they ended up ranking sixth. I would probably have them a little bit lower. I would have them below Michigan and below Florida. But still, it's a really good job. And so I think it makes sense why he ends up staying there. He's always been a West Coast guy. Maybe that's just something that he couldn't get over either. And when he got the offer that he ended up getting from Arizona, it was sort of a relief to him that, hey, this is ultimately the way that I wanted things to go. I wanted to be able to stay out here on the West Coast. I think he went about it as classy of a way as you could possibly go about it. So, I think you from that perspective, you shouldn't feel any hard feelings towards Tommy Lloyd. He did what was best for him and his family. And I think that's something that you have to commend. But yeah, unfortunately, it was not what's best for Carolina basketball. And, that's what sucks. And that's why I think there are some people on social media that are kind of panicking here today and saying that, this is not necessarily as good of a job as it once was. I still think that's a little bit much. But, I think that they were hoping that you could go out and really be able to take a swing and get whoever you wanted. We'll never know how close it ultimately was to Tommy Lloyd taking the job. But I'm with you. I think with some of the smoke that was around it, it's hard not to think that he was pretty close to taking the job, but that you got what you needed from Arizona to be able to stay in place. And so, I think you just have to tip your cap to Arizona and give them credit, give their chancellor, their athletic department credit for making sure that they did whatever they possibly could to keep a guy that's probably going to be a legend there, is probably going to challenge some of the things that Lute Olson ended up doing there in his time as their head coach. And so that's all you can really do today if you're a Carolina fan. Now the focus is, where do things turn for Carolina? Who is that next guy that Carolina is looking at? And could it be someone that's currently, playing in the Final Four in Dusty May across the way? Is that where Carolina's attention turns to? I think that's going to be the most interesting thing. And hopefully we're going to get some intel that comes out on this stuff relatively soon, so that we sort of understand what direction Carolina is ultimately heading in.
Let me get to the other soundbite from Tommy, and then we'll kind of have to do the thing we didn't think we were going to have to do, which is kind of turn the page and start looking elsewhere. But he did, after that initial statement, the initial comment where he announced that he was staying at Arizona, he did confirm that reported phone call with Michael Jordan. He did confirm that phone call did not take place.
North Carolina is a first-class organization, and I appreciate them for the way they've handled this. Michael Jordan, the phone call never did happen, so I'll put that to rest. But come on. We all idolized, MJ, and I don't how many hours I watched that "Come Fly with Me" video, and my kid grew up watching his the movie he made, and it's amazing that that opportunity was even thought could be possible. With that being said, though, I made a decision that my Michael Jordan is Steve Kerr, and I'm proud to be an Arizona Wildcat.
All right, so there you go. Remember, there was a lot of scuttlebutt that MJ had made contact with him and was financially committing to him in a way that he wasn't willing to do so when approached about financially committing to Hubert Davis. We now know that was not true. He never had any contact with Tommy, and so all the angst around that was all for nothing. It quite literally never took place. I think just some final thoughts on Tommy, and then we'll move on. I think it will be interesting as we monitor his coaching career. Does he stay at Arizona forever? Because there's a job in his current conference that could come open very, very soon, and that's the Kansas job. If you were to ask me, what I think of the Kansas job, I think it's the second best job in college basketball. I think it's right there behind Carolina. They supposedly have a succession plan put in place with Jock Vaughn, but you would imagine that when Bill Self were to retire, and that's going to be sooner rather than later, just given the multitude of health problems, will they follow that plan, or will they look at the issues that Carolina had and maybe conduct a national search? I say all that to say, this is not the last time Tommy's going to be approached for a big-time job in college basketball. I think Kansas will be interested. Kentucky, you would imagine, could be open as soon as next year. That they're going to make a run at him, as well as that Indiana job that turns over more turnovers in the local McDonald's. You would imagine they would make a run at him. And so I think if he were to finish his career here and he coaches there for the next 15, 20 years, I think this becomes a lot easier to swallow, because he was really happy at Arizona and was given everything that he wanted, that he needed to run the type of program he felt like he needed to have to compete for championships on an annual basis. But if he were to maybe leave next year for Kansas, leave in a few years for Kentucky, and these are all hypothetical situations. Those are just two jobs I think very well could be open before the end of the decade. I do think no matter who Carolina ultimately ends up hiring, that could be a real kick to the ego, considering we think our job is better than the job in Lawrence and the job in Lexington.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would certainly be a bruise to the ego. I mean, at that point, that would really show you that maybe Carolina isn't seen as being on the same level as Kansas, as Kentucky. I think Kentucky, that would be very disheartening, because Kentucky, we've seen guys that have turned that job down recently. So that would make you believe that that job is below Carolina. So I would be shocked. I think at this point, he is really comfortable with staying on the West Coast. I think he believes that he could ultimately build something out there at Arizona, build them into a powerhouse and really have success out there on the West Coast. And maybe that's ultimately what he ends up doing. We'll have to wait and see on that. But yeah, that would be where you would start to get angry if you're a Tar Heel fan, is if within the next couple of years, Kansas comes open and he ends up taking the job there, or if Kentucky comes open and he takes the job there. If Indiana came open and he took the job there, I mean, Tar Heel fans should be absolutely furious, because you can say anything that you want about Carolina. There are people that think that Carolina is trending in the wrong direction, whatever. It is not the Indiana job. So I think that Carolina is clearly the better job of the two. Indiana at this point, I don't even know if Indiana is considered a top 15 job in college basketball anymore, with where things have gotten to at that point, at this point here recently. So yeah, I mean, I think you're just hopeful that he's going to end up staying out there, stay committed to Arizona. But ultimately, the other thing is look, if Carolina lands a coach that ends up being successful, you're not going to worry about it. As long as Carolina is meeting the standard that they're supposed to be meeting, you're not really going to be worried about Tommy Lloyd until you potentially have to see Tommy Lloyd on a national stage. And that would be where you ultimately hope that you can get to. And so I think that's really the thought of Carolina fans right now, is just, can you get someone that is the caliber of Tommy Lloyd, is close to the caliber of Tommy Lloyd, or are you going to have to settle for someone that's in that second or third tier, really that third tier that we've seen on some of these lists that have been coming out for the Carolina vacancy? I think that's the thing. That's the reason why, again, you go back and you look at social media, you go back and you look at the Carolina message boards, and there are some people panicking because they think that it could get to that point. And if it gets to that point, I mean, some of those third tier candidates, then you have to start wondering if those guys look at the job as too big necessarily for them, and that they would rather stay at certain schools to be able to hold on to what they've got there. That's, I think, where people are starting to get a little bit concerned when it comes to the job and where it stands right now.
Did see Myron Goodman mention this on the stream, but I'm looking at Brendan Marks' Twitter right now. He's a national college basketball reporter for The Athletic. And Brendan tweets this quote, per source, UNC never actually offered Tommy Lloyd the job. Financial discussion between parties indicated UNC was willing to make Lloyd one of the highest paid coaches in America, end quote. The Norlander, the Matt Norlander side said that he was going to be a top 2 paid coach in college basketball. I think now he's a top 4 paid coach in the sport, which I think that part matters. That Carolina was willing to pony up the money, because that's what it's going to take. If you're trying to lure away a guy that's established, and that was what Carolina was trying to do with Tommy Lloyd, and now that's where they'll try to next. I don't think the Dusty May courting will take quite as long. I think Carolina will make the call. I think Carolina will have preliminary conversations, because you have to. We're talking about a guy that's been to 2 Final Fours since 2023, one with FAU. Now he's done so at Michigan, and very well may lead the Wolverines to their first national championship since 1989. This is one that, even from the very beginning, I could have seen Tommy Lloyd leaving Arizona for Carolina. I don't see Dusty May leaving Michigan for Carolina. One, his alma mater, Indiana, was open just last year, and he didn't even flinch. He stayed committed to Michigan. Now, yes, Michigan does have some financial issues of their own. They're reported about them flying commercial when they went to the Players Era tournament out in Las Vegas. Was a big talking point within the industry. I think they even bust to their first round tournament site, which was in Buffalo. Now, I do know that, if it's under 400 miles, the NCAA will still pay your way if you want to take the bus. But regardless, most teams would be flying to their regional site or their first round tournament site. And I do believe that the Wolverines did bus there. They have to move here because he's the next logical candidate. But I don't see this one getting much traction, regardless of what happens tomorrow night at the Final Four in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I don't ultimately see him taking the job either. If he was going to leave, I feel like he would have left for Indiana, because that was his alma mater. It's a job that still, I think, as I said, I don't know if it's inside the top 15, but to him probably would still matter a lot. And so for him to turn that job down, I think shows you that there might not be interest. The other thing that you have to wonder about with him, and if the reporting is true from Brendan Marks, which there's no reason to believe that it isn't, then, I mean, you're talking about this is still going to take a while to be able to get him in here. Now, it could be a similar thing with Billy Donovan as well. He could be a guy that wants to wait until the end of his regular season to get him in here, or any other college coach that's out there, although their seasons have already come to an end. But yeah, I mean, with Dusty May, you could be waiting for a while. And so, yeah, that's one that I really want now. I think that's probably my top guy in terms of wants, because you look at what he did at FAU, you look at what he's done so far this year at Michigan, and really even last year at Michigan, leading them to a conference tournament title in his first year as their head coach. He knows what he's doing. He's a great coach. He's one of the top coaches in college basketball. And I think that's ultimately where we were wanting Carolina to go, was to hire away one of these top guys. I just don't know that this one is ultimately where Carolina is going to get their guy from. Unless he just completely changes his mindset from where he was a year ago. I think that he's probably going to look at what he's got at Michigan, and he's probably going to stick with that for the time being. And, he's going to be a guy that probably will get a pay raise as well. I wouldn't be shocked, especially after what he's done this year, and especially if he wins a national championship, if he ends up getting a little bit of a raise. I think that's probably what we expect from him is that he's using this as an avenue to get more money, where we thought with Tommy Lloyd, we thought with the relationship with the athletic director that might have been a little bit of a different scenario.
Yeah, also, I think you got to point to like the Roy Williams angle on why I do think that factored into Tommy Lloyd. We know that the Carolina administration wanted to hire Mark Few 5 years ago. We go the Hubert Davis route. Now Mark Few is not really not really just a logical candidate if at this point. And look, who knows? Maybe this is the name that now reemerges because they missed out on Tommy. But Tommy was, his top right-hand man. That could be someone that Roy Williams could have vouched to Carolina fans that were maybe disgruntled that they weren't hiring a quote-unquote Carolina guy after the firing of Hubert Davis. When you look at Dusty, yeah, I think it'll be quick. It'll be brief. I think you could very well see something announced within the next 36 hours about a new contract extension for him at Michigan, with reinforcements financially that he wants, that he needs to continue to keep Michigan at a championship level program, which we have no doubt that if he's there, that's where we expect Michigan to be on an annual basis. Which brings us to the guy that when this job first came open, I thought was going to be the guy. And wasn't my first choice, obviously. Y'all guys know how I felt about TJ Otzelberger, but Otzelberger took his way out of the running. Then, I was really all in on Tommy Lloyd. But when the job first came open and we got some first initial intel, it really felt like this was going to be Billy Donovan's job. And, of course, if you don't know, Billy Donovan, the current head coach of the Chicago Bulls, but all signs are pointing towards an exit from Chicago that's going to be rather mutual. I think they're wanting to move on. I think he wants out. And the belief is that he would be very interested in the Carolina vacancy. And I cannot remember, and if you maybe remember, so I don't know if it was Inside Carolina or maybe it was Andrew Jones at Tar Heel 24/7 that did report very on that there was some initial contact between Carolina and Donovan, but it was more on Donovan's camp, really just starting the PR campaign because he's going to be a head basketball coach somewhere other than Chicago next year. And, when he was at Florida, and of course he left Florida after 2014, the belief was that this was the only power conference job he would have ever left Florida for. Even more so than Kentucky, who had courted him previously. The belief was that if he was ever going to leave Florida for a collegiate position, it would have been to coach UNC. I was listening to my guy Gary Parrish on the Ion College Basketball podcast earlier this week, and he brought up something that I don't think we've even really thought a whole lot about. Just because he could be out in Chicago doesn't mean that when the NBA coaching carousel gets started, doesn't mean that he's not going to be desired or valued in the NBA circles. And the expectation is that there are going to be 8 to 10 vacancies that come open in the NBA, which really would put to test my theory that the job at Carolina carries more weight, more prestige than other NBA jobs, because there's a very good chance he could have his pick of the litter between going back to college or staying in the NBA. There's a lot of skepticism around Billy Donovan. And even I was arguing against him yesterday on the radio station in favor of Tommy Lloyd because, not having coached in college in over a decade, not ideal. But the track record of success speaks for itself. He's won over 500 games. He's coached in he's coached in 4 Final Fours. He's coached in 3 title games, and he's won 2 of them. And when he went back-to-back in the mid-2000s, was the first time anyone had done so since Duke did it in the early 90s. Of course, UConn did it as recently as 2 years ago, and they were the first school to go back-to-back since Florida did it with Joakim Noah, Al Horford, and the crew. What do you make of Billy Donovan probably now emerging as the likely favorite to be the next head basketball coach at UNC.
Yeah, I mean, he's not the elite coach that I think we all wanted. I think that's where you ultimately land, was that you wanted a guy like Tommy Lloyd. You wanted a guy like Dusty May, one of the best coaches in college basketball, to leave their position and come and take the position at Carolina. And we thought that was ultimately where they were going to go. This is still a high level hire, I think, by Carolina, but it's not on that elite level. And so I believe that it could work. I think there could be some success here for Billy Donovan. It's just how much success is that ultimately going to result in? He's been out of the game for 11 years, guys. And I know a lot of people want to say, well, this is NBA light. This is exactly what the NBA is like. It's a little bit different in the fact that you still have to recruit. You still have to be on the road recruiting these guys, as opposed to the NBA where you can just allow your GM to do all the recruiting. I don't think that's what Billy Donovan would be if he's taking the head coaching job here. He's going to want to be a little bit more hands-on when it comes to building his roster and everything like that. And so, yeah, I think he's going to have to travel and that could be something that ultimately is a little bit different than what he's doing right now at the NBA level. It also, again, I guess there is an appetite for him, but at the same time, I mean, I'm not sure how much of an appetite or how long that appetite lasts when he sees the direction that the NCAA is going in, where there are no regulations to anything that is going on. That's the concerning part to me, is that we've seen some older coaches that, have been around the sport for a long, long time that sort of fell out of love with the sport. And that's the reason that they ended up retiring, was because of how much the sport had changed. For Billy Donovan, he might be wanting to get back into it, but when he finally settles back into that role, he might realize, whoa, this is incredibly different from what I was dealing with when I was at Florida, and it's incredibly different than what people have been telling me about and comparing it to the NBA. So that's what worries me a little bit about that. I still think he would be able to come in and probably recruit at a high level. People know about the success that he had at Florida. I think that's certainly something that even the younger generation now would understand, that he's been a guy that's won multiple national championships. That's not something that you just gloss over and say that means absolutely nothing. But at the same time, those championships were 20 years ago. So how much does that really carry now as we sit here in 2026 going into the 2026-27 season? I think that's going to be interesting to see what type of factor that would be on the recruiting side of things, and what type of factor it would be, especially on the transfer portal side of things. And that's where, again, he's going to have to work that a lot different than what you're dealing with even at the NBA level when it comes to free agency. Now, the one thing is that if there are some tensions, people have said that, there have been some rumors that Jim Tanner, is a guy that, may not be the best fit for Carolina moving forward if they get a new coach. Well, the good news is that Billy is used to working with guys that he doesn't necessarily have the best connection with. So even if there isn't a great connection right away out of the gate between him and Jim Tanner, and if Carolina ultimately wants to move in another direction, he's been there, done that. He's currently doing that with the GM of the Chicago Bulls, who he does not have a great relationship with. You could see why, because some of the moves that the Bulls have made in recent years haven't been great. And I think that's the other reason why, if you're looking at his current standing and saying, well, that's the reason why we're not necessarily excited about going after him, I don't think you could take a whole lot away from what's going on in his time with the Chicago Bulls. Remember that when he first got into the NBA as the Oklahoma City head coach, he did win 55 games right out of the gate. He had some success at the NBA level. It's just when he eventually worked his way to Chicago, a job that I think most people would look at as one of the more prestigious in the sport in the NBA, I think it just didn't work out because they made some of the worst moves that you could possibly make. Going all in on a guy like DeMar DeRozan as, a supposed hero, a guy that was going to lead you to a ton of success, trading as much as you did for Nikola Vucevic. Those were not moves that were necessarily lauded by the NBA community. And so it's put Billy Donovan in a really tough spot to be able to succeed there. I'm not necessarily worried about that. I'm more worried about the fact that he is 60 years old. How long is he going to be here? And the fact that he has been out of college basketball as long as he's been out.
Yeah, you said that it wouldn't be an elite hire. If 500 wins, 4 Final Fours, and 2 national championships doesn't qualify as elite, I don't know what is. Like, he's accomplished more at the collegiate level than the guy that we wanted him to hire, or we wanted Carolina to hire in Tommy Lloyd. He's accomplished more than Dusty May. It's just not recent because he was so successful at the collegiate level, had some frayed relationships at Florida that pushed him to go to the NBA, where, I think you got to remember, you're right. When he had some success at Oklahoma City, I think it was his first or second year, they went to the Western Conference Finals. They blew a 3-1 lead against that Warriors team that I think would go on to lose in the NBA Finals, if I have the year remembered correctly. Chicago hasn't been what it was hoping to be because of some off the court stuff that was outside of his hands. When they gave him competitive rosters, they were in the playoffs every single year. When they gave him rosters that didn't make a whole lot of sense, you've seen the results that you see happen on the court this year. When you hear the industry talk about Billy Donovan coming back to college, and I've heard this from Parrish, Jeff Goodman, among others, they believe if the second he was hired, he would be considered the best coach in the sport. I don't know what that means, but the industry would think very highly of him. And how many coaches currently in the sport could walk into a recruit's house or host a transfer portal target and throw down 2 national championship rings with a decade of NBA coaching to go along with it? There aren't many. I think that would be very appealing, and something that I think Carolina is very motivated to do is get back to recruiting and developing NBA level talent. We make fun of all the guys that Duke has put in the NBA because they haven't won a national championship with those guys. But I don't think we wouldn't take any of those guys on our roster if we had the capability to have that kind of talent within our program. I think Billy Donovan would be able to acquire that type of talent, and I think he would be able to develop that type of talent. To me, the biggest drawback is the age, because he's 61. Now, how much does he have left in the tank? Because, like, in my head, best case scenario, he coaches 10 years. Now, if he coaches 10 years and wins 5 ACC championships and goes to 3 Final Fours and Carolina cuts down the nets at least once, we wouldn't look back on it as a failure. But I think something that I'm very eager in, it's why Lloyd was my top choice, and it's why Dusty May would make a lot of sense, or TJ Otzelberger, was another guy I was interested in. I think we want some long-term stability here. And we want someone that's going to be here for 15 to 20 years. That's going to retire here. As Kenny Smith said on CBS a few weeks ago during NCAA tournament coverage, I think that's what Billy Donovan would be doing. I think if he took Carolina up on the offer, I think it would be his last job as a basketball coach. I do worry, though, about the time frame and how long does he have? He doesn't look old. He doesn't look like he is aged just by dealing with the mess that is that Chicago Bulls job. I do think, though, off-court structure would be as important as it was going to be under Hubert. And I don't know Jim Tanner personally. For all I know, I think he's a good guy, Carolina guy, has made a lot of money representing a bunch of different pro athletes. I don't think it's going to be beneficial for him to be the GM for the program next year. If he wants to have a role in a front office, that's fine. But I do think Carolina needs to put a GM that you're used to seeing at the pro level in place here. And to clarify, I felt the same way about that if Hubert was going to be retained. Like, one of the things I was wanting to talk about if he was staying and the changes that were being made was to bring in a personnel guy to be the GM, not an agent, not a contract guy. There's value in having that guy in your administration and within your program, but I want a talent evaluator as my GM, not someone there that's crossing the T's or dotting the I's on a contract. And then the other drawback is if he coaches out the remainder of the Bulls season, and that's the expectation, the NBA calendar doesn't end until April 12th. The transfer portal opens April 8th. Now, maybe he can reach an agreement to be bought out from the Bulls. Carolina could maybe hire him, have him put in place when the portal opens, and they could start navigating that. But that, to me, I think is an even bigger concern, more so than his age. Is you're talking best case scenario, season ends on Sunday, he's hired on Monday, introduced on Tuesday. You're a week behind the portal, and we don't know what that could mean for the roster for next year. And I don't think Carolina fired Hubert Davis to go into next year with the idea of it being a rebuilding year. Like, I think they fired Hubert Davis with the goal and the expectation to compete right away for conference championships, a high tournament seed, and a deep run in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I think you're really concerned about with this hire, more than even, the age and even the fact that he's been out of the game for as long as he has, is when is this going to get off the ground? If he ends up coming in on the 12th, I mean, yeah, as you said, it opens on Tuesday. The transfer portal opens on Tuesday. So there are going to be guys that are entering. There are going to be guys. There's already one guy that entered his name into the transfer portal, or reportedly is going to enter his name into the transfer portal when it opens out of Belmont, who is already committed to Tennessee. So there are already guys that behind the scenes are making deals that are going to be, within the first couple of days of the transfer portal, making their decisions. And so Carolina could miss out on some really good players. We thought that was going to be the case, even if they ended up getting Tommy Lloyd, Dusty May, any of those types of guys. If you got to wait all the way to the 12th, I mean, yeah, who is that guy that's the interim person that's sort of managing things? It's going to have to be somebody that was currently a part of the staff. What was a member of Hubert Davis's staff, and is probably going to have to stick around on Billy Donovan's staff in order to sort of bridge that gap, because you've got to be able to recruit some guys out of that transfer portal while Billy Donovan is still coaching the end of the season. So, I mean, to me, what would have to happen is you would have to at least have an agreement in place with him by early next week. And then, yeah, he's going to have to end up coaching out the rest of the regular season. And you're going to have somebody that he knows and trusts that can come in and sort of manage things for that time until he can get on campus. That is far from ideal for Carolina if they want to be able to win. And the thing is that, we saw it. There's a lot of people in the fan base that believe this, and you see it in the Carolina family. Tyler Hansborough said it today. You need to come here and win immediately. So in order to do that, you're going to have a pretty successful season in the transfer portal. Billy Donovan, with the timeline that he has right now, that's not necessarily setting up for him to come in and have immediate success. What you're going to have to do is bank on keeping a lot of the guys that are on this roster currently, keeping the recruits that you have, and then finding a way to sprinkle some guys in late in the portal once you actually get on campus and can settle into the role. So, I mean, yeah, that's one of the scary elements of it. There's no doubt about it. And I think that's something that we're going to have to talk about more and more if we get the reports that he is Carolina's top target, which it seems like if he's not the top target for Carolina, he's probably number 2 on that list as we sit here right now.
Yeah, I don't think as of this very moment he's Carolina's top target. Do I think if we reconvened on Sunday night, I think he would be Carolina's top choice because I think Dusty's going to get something done at Michigan that's going to take him out of the running because I don't think Dusty's looking to leave unless Michigan forces his hand. Now, if and we don't know what the exact offer or what the financial commitment was to Tommy Lloyd was. We don't have the particulars. We just know that it was very competitive. But if they take that same offer and they take it to Lloyd and Michigan isn't willing to match or meet him in the middle, maybe that does swing the needle in Carolina's favor and he has to begin to think about things. But we know Michigan. We know like that, yes, they're a football school first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. They got a lot of basketball tradition there. There's a lot of history there that they value, and they're not going to let someone like Dusty May just walk out that door. So I do think probably the next time we're talking about the coaching search, I do think I said Tommy Lloyd. I do think that Billy Donovan will be the top option that we're having to talk about and really dissect. Last thing we'll do, and then we'll get out of here. Just kind of want to address the reaction to this because, of course, you saw, I think Tyler Hansbrough, the quote that the Field of 68 guys put out was, maybe this job isn't the job that we think it all is. And then, I mean, we've got a endless amount of comments here on the stream, and we want to thank everybody that's watching live on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter. I'll read through some of these. Here we go. We got Miracle. UNC thought they could get who they wanted at coach, and it kind of backfired. SCSC 864. UNC really dropped the ball on this one. You don't fire anyone unless you're 100% sure you have your coach. It's JMax 777. We're going to be in the same class as UK and Georgetown has-beens. If this program becomes what Georgetown's become, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. This podcast will go away because I don't have the ability to talk about that level of suck. What that program has been for the majority of my lifetime. I just don't have it in me. Kentucky, okay, one Sweet 16 in 7 years. But you know, nobody wants their job because of their maniacal fan base. And I don't want to call our fan base maniacal here because this is what allows us to do what we do. We couldn't write a blog. We couldn't host a podcast if there wasn't the appetite for people to hear what I have to say, what you have to say about Carolina basketball, about Tar Heel football, on and on and on. Guys, they missed on a candidate. One. It's take a deep breath. If we're sitting here next to this time next week and we ain't got a coach, burn it to the ground because I'll be there with you. They've missed on one guy. Now, yes, you could say that Brad Stevens took his name out of the running. TJ Otzelberger took his name out of the running. But that doesn't mean that Carolina missed. Those were just two guys that weren't willing to leave for whatever reason. Brad Stevens has a great cushy job. TJ Otzelberger is a Midwest guy. His wife went to Iowa State. Probably feels more comfortable in his skin in the Midwest than coming to Chapel Hill. I love the passion, but I think we got to let this thing work itself out. Yes, Carolina wanted Tommy Lloyd, and they honed in on him, and it appears they were willing to give him a Godfather offer, and he said no. But that doesn't mean that everyone else is going to say no. Someone's going to say yes. Someone is going to take this job because it's a great job. We just have to figure out, where does it stack up? Where does it where does it measure up? I'm not wishing that Hubert Davis was still employed, because I think Carolina is still going to be able to get an upgrade over him as of this point right now. And so I think we just have to let this thing play out, because the kind of, I guess, angst or the thought process around the job from the national media was this. Best case scenario, they hire their guy Tommy Lloyd. Worst case scenario, they hire Billy Donovan, who's won 2 national championships. I feel like if they land a coach that's won 2 national titles and has gone to 4 Final Fours, I think we'll feel pretty comfortable and confident with where the program is going. Is it okay to feel dejected? Sure. Because, maybe you thought that Tommy Lloyd was coming because it was like Roy Williams 2.0. But here's our guy, Greg Ward. This was a huge blow today. Is the program heading towards mediocrity? I've never thought I'd think that in my lifetime. I don't have those feelings today, right now. Now you have to promote Brad Frederick or Sean May because nobody wants your job. Yeah, you're screwed. Yeah, it's time to panic. I don't think it's going to get that bad. I still think Carolina's going to be able to hire a quality basketball coach that's going to be equipped with more financial resources than Hubert Davis was. And we know how important that is now. And I still think when this is all said and done, we look to have a better coach on our sidelines next year than what we had last year.
Yeah, I certainly think they will have a better coach in terms of, the X's and O's and everything like that. It's just how much better of a coach is it going to be? I think that's the thing that has people worried today. Because with Tommy Lloyd, I think everybody had done the research. They had gotten to a point where that was their guy. And we know Tommy Lloyd is one of the best in the country currently. So I think that was where a lot of people's minds were at. That was the standard that they had set for this next head coach, was it's going to be one of the best coaches in the country. And I guess now, you have to sort of adjust those expectations. Is it going to be a guy that, has, the potential of taking you to a pretty high level? I think, yes. I think that's where you're kind of at when you've got a guy like Billy Donovan that could potentially be on your sidelines. But I think that even for some people, that's going to be seen as a disappointment, because you felt like you could go out there and get anybody you wanted. Because as we have said, we feel like this is the best job in college sports. I'm wondering, do people actually believe that around college basketball? I think it's guaranteed it's a top 5 job. But do they look at it as a job that you are willing to leave any job in the country to be able to take? I think as we sit here today, that answer is probably no.
It was just voted tied for the second best job according to the Athletics coaches survey. So a coaching survey told you it was, the way that they did the points, it was tied for second.
Yeah, and one of those coaches that probably voted it as a high-ranking job chose not to leave. So that's the thing. We'll have to see. The thing is that I don't know if you can panic just yet. But the panic moment is if you get past Donovan. You get past Donovan, there's going to be people that are going to absolutely melt down. And look, there are going to be, the coaches that Carolina could go out after at that point. Do I think they're better coaches than Hubert Davis? Yes, I think there are some guys that are on that list that probably are better coaches than Hubert Davis. But again, how much better are they? How long is it going to take for us to ultimately see that they are better coaches than Hubert Davis? That's the thing that's concerning. And, Billy Donovan, that's a guy that's still, regardless of what you think, he's a guy that's trending downward in his career. He's not, I don't look at him as the guy that's coming in as a guy that is like, it's hard to look at him as the guy that won 2 national championships and think that's definitely the guy that you're getting, that Carolina is going to return to that pedestal under him, guaranteed. I think that was what people were really wanting, was a guarantee that you will be getting back to being in the Elite Eight, being in the Final Four, more often than not competing for the ACC regular season title, competing in the ACC tournament. And I think right now that's without Tommy Lloyd or Dusty May, that's why people feel like it's uncertain.
Yeah, I'll counter though, and then we'll get out of here. If that was their thought process, their top candidate should have been Dusty May over Tommy Lloyd. He's achieved more in his coaching career than Tommy Lloyd has. He's gone to more Final Fours than Tommy Lloyd has had. Remember, had Arizona not broken through this year, and I'm not taking away that they did, there was going to be that narrative around him that was he ever going to be able to break through in the tournament? So if you were wanting this first shot, for sure, coach, then your top choice should have been Dusty over Tommy. But Tommy checked off, I think, a lot of other boxes that matter to Carolina, maybe outside of coaching. And that's why they went that route. I'm not disagreeing with that. I wanted Tommy Lloyd too, more so than Dusty May. But if you're looking at it from that perspective, then your top choices should have been Dusty May. And then you really can get off the wall with the Rick Pitino with what he's done at St. John's. And that list just keeps going on and on and on. So we'll just have to wait and see. If they don't get Donovan, I agree. It's time to be concerned, because at that rate, you're not getting any elite coach. I think Billy Donovan in college would come back and be an elite coach right away. And I think Carolina would be poised, depending on how that hire works out, to put together a really good roster to compete the way we want to compete next year. But if you get through the 12th and he's not your head coach, and you're going into the second week of the portal being open and you just don't have your guy, I think the outlook for next year is going to be very doom and gloom. And again, you didn't make the decision that you made to fire Hubert Davis to have a rebuilding year in 2026, 2027. With that, folks, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. In the meantime, we will direct you guys to the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. We had you covered with this Lloyd news. Go check that article out. As I was able to get that up this afternoon. And as more news were to come out from this coaching search, we will have you covered at HeelToughBlog.com. And with the portal fast approaching, we'll have you covered on all that news as well. Because Carolina is going to be very active. There's going to be a lot of guys leaving. And then whenever Carolina makes a hire, there will be a lot of guys that they will be contacting. And we'll be writing articles about all that portal news, HeelToughBlog.com. And Anthony has you covered on the football side of things. Some recruiting news came down earlier this week. 2 guys commit, 1 guy decommitted. Articles are on the website up on the website about that. And as any information does sprinkle out about spring practice, we will relay that to you guys as best that we can. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Everywhere you find your podcast, just search the Four Corners Podcast and we'll pop up. There, we strongly encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any audio editions of the show. Don't be afraid to leave a comment. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. We got 3 new reviews earlier this week. We want some feedback, though, from you guys. What do you like about the show? What can we do better? Don't be afraid to voice your opinion whenever you do rate, review, and subscribe. If you're a video consumer of the pod, the best way to keep up with us, like and follow the Facebook page at Heel Tough Blog. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Blog, or follow us on Twitter at HTB_Josh for me, at HTB Anthony for him. The links are posted to both of our accounts. The second we go live, you'll be notified. You can jump in and be a part of the conversation. Did want to shout out the chat once again. Very lively, very active. From those of you watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, just want to make it known that even though we didn't maybe get to your comment, we see your comments, we appreciate your comments, and we love having you here. That's what makes doing these live shows all the much more fun. We encourage you to do it the next time we are on here live talking Carolina basketball. But with that, folks, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.